Hello and welcome to my live stream on Hasidic education and education altogether. Hi, to those of you who don't know me, my name is Frida Wiesel. My YouTube channel covers Hasidic, Jewish life, culture, history, and my work as a tour guide in this community. And today I am going to do a live stream conversation that I'm hoping is going to be very informal and just a chat with you guys on the subject of my latest video. Full disclosure, this is the first time I am using a new software for live stream, so I am seeing this a little bit as a test. I'm hoping it will run more smoothly than my previous trials, but I would very much appreciate if you could let me know in the comments that you can hear me, that everything is working okay, and that we can get started. I'd also love to hear who is here, where you're from, and of course, I am hoping to take your questions. So, hello everyone, and how is everyone doing? So, I don't see the chat. Can you please post a comment in the chat? Hello from South Africa. I can hear you and see you. Hello, Lisa. Hold on. Okay. Excellent. Hello from London. Coming through clear and audio is great. Shabbat shalom. Shabbos to you, Benjamin, and everyone else. Welcome. I'm so happy you are all here. We have W and Andrea and Shandy from Montreal, and Silence Says from San Diego. Hello, everyone. I'm getting the hang of this a little bit. This way I can show your comments if I want to share it with all of you. That is Zelda writing in Yiddish that everything is okay. So I first of all want to tell you that I'm going on a year since I've been doing YouTube videos more seriously. This project is taking an enormous amount of time and energy and effort out of me. Right now, I don't have any sponsorship, so it is a very big investment. So I just want to put it out there. If anyone has something that might interest my viewers, I would need to make sure I can get behind what you would want me to sponsor. But putting it out there that I would love to make this project more tenable in the long term, since it is a very expensive project. Let's see. Erica says, I loved seeing your school binder. So fascinating. My mother saved a few items from my schooling, but not that much. I attended Catholic elementary school. I didn't get to read many of the comments yet. It's been a really hard, really stressful week for me. So I have not seen many comments, except if I write a comment on the top of a video, I get a notification to my inbox what you replied, and I saw some of those, and I really am interested. I find it really interesting when you tell me about your own education, Catholic education. People talk about Mormon educations. People talk about the boys' education. I found those really interesting, and I think it helps round out having a sense of what other education systems are like. It helps us understand, it helps me understand what my education, which of course we all have usually one education, is like in comparison. So yeah, I actually not only have those 2 years, I found a high school binder that I have from English that is interesting, and of course a lot more advanced, and I might show it to you one day if you're all interested. Mimi, hi. And hello, Mary. So Zelda asks in Yiddish, what mostly helped my education? Are you saying building as education in worldly life? Or are you saying in general, the general experience? Zelda, it was you who told me, who quoted Mark Twain on "Don't let your schooling get in the way of your education." I have always been a big believer that schooling is only a small piece of the cumulative environment that actually educates a child. And furthermore, I've also always believed that a curriculum is only a part of what a school does in terms of educating the child. So if you look at my curriculum, that's only a part of it. The environment I was in as an all girls world, as having no access to boys and being in a very single gender space where it's you have no sense of, from the one hand, the male gaze, and you have no sense of the opposite sex and all of that drama. I think that, for instance, is a very big part of my education, even though it's not in the curriculum. So I think education is a very broad thing, and all of those pieces together have shaped me. And what I will say, I'm not sure if this answers your question, Zelda, about what helped most my education in worldly life, but I will tell you, when I did this video on my education, I had the idea to not look at anything before I film so that it has a freshness to it. That was my idea. It wasn't the best idea because there was a lot of information. I didn't realize how much information it was. I was absolutely shocked. I'm still looking through it again. But the lesson I took away from this is we forget so much of what we learn in school. If someone told me I learned these things in school that we had covered, I would not believe it. In fact, a friend recently told me that he still cuts his nail starting from the middle finger and then he skips fingers and he goes back. And I said, what? Why? He said, because that's how you're taught. You have to cut your nails in a special pattern, starting from X finger, let's say the second finger, and then hopping over to the fourth. I had, if you had asked me, I had never heard of that before. And then I looked through my binder, and you can see it in the video. We actually learned it. I numbered 2 hands with the order of cutting nails. So my lesson from having gone through this binder for this video has been that probably our education, we don't learn so much. We don't learn so much as we. I think we forget a lot of what our education is. I really like your work. You should consider crowdfunding future projects. Thank you so much. I would love to get sponsors to help me make this project more. I think that's probably the way that I see other YouTubers do it. Let's see. Fluent Talk really helps the Hasidic male sector with English education. Have you heard of it? I have not. What is it? I've seen a little ad on it was so cold in my apartment I had to wear a jacket earlier. I've seen a little ad on Twitter, I believe, it was a very hilarious ad. You know how I upload to my channel ads, and it was pretty bad ad. It was of a Hasidic man not being able to speak English, and then fast forward and he can speak English. And I think it was some program that teaches you English, but I don't know if it was Fluent Talk, and I'm curious about that. Hi, Chrissy from London, UK. It's hot here. It's hot here outside as well. And I'm sure you guys know we had crazy, crazy weather this week. It was orange skies in New York. It was absolutely surreal. Yeah, Elizabeth, I think so. Zelda says, did you pull out anything that you relied upon from school in worldly life? That's a good question. I think that I have a lot of knowledge from school in terms of my Yiddish education, for instance, sitting in the back of my mind and it's shaping me. I definitely think that it's a good question. I'm going to think about it, Zelda. I have to think about it more. I don't know how much. Definitely learning numbers, math, to tell time, all of that are very useful. And I'm sure those are foundational and they're in me. Did you study any other religions in school? Existential. One of the interesting things I noticed is that one of the things the censors in our Hasidic school took out are anything in our secular education that mentioned the Bible or God. And that was, I think, because they saw it inappropriate for us to be talking about serious religious subjects like the Bible and God in the more in the everyday. So there were these more conservative teachers, the more holy ladies who taught in the morning the religious subjects, and they would talk about religious subjects, but only, of course, our religion. There would be no comparative religion. But when there were mentions of other religions like the Bible and God, of Christian faiths, an example is the Martin Luther King Jr. speech, I believe has mentions of God. The censors would take it out because it was considered inappropriate. That's my guess, that this was their reasoning. It was inappropriate for us to mix what's called lamida choil, everyday studies, ordinary subjects, regular worldly stuff, with something like holy subjects. So I think the answer to your question is we didn't really learn about religions and the way you learn about it in the secular world, comparative religions. And I think I knew very little about other religions. Lifestyle Mama XO says, I went to Catholic school my whole life. I know people usually have bad things to say about the education in the Hasidic community, but what are you grateful for learning through your education? I would say I had a very robust social world, and I felt socially gratified, and I felt creatively that I had a lot of outlets. And I wonder, in hindsight, having left the community and seen what it's like to be in a co-ed world, I think that I benefited from being in such a strong female world. It made my childhood more innocent. I definitely had a lot of issues with how restrained we had to be, how well behaved we had to be. I struggled with that a lot. That's how I remember my education, as jumping out of my skin. But in hindsight, I do think that I probably was shaped in a positive way by being in an all women's environment. Of course, it's really hard to know. Thank you for great questions. Good Shabbos. Do you wish you had received a more secular education? Do you feel that would have better prepared you for secular life? To be honest, I have had a very hard time adjusting to the secular world after leaving the Hasidic community. It's very many years later, but I lived in abject poverty for some years because I couldn't get on my feet. And I would say the number one reason I couldn't get on my own 2 feet was because I was a single mother of a child. So I don't see my education as the reason why I struggled so much. I think I picked up enough to get by. It was really the burden of raising a child alone that I see as the issue. So I never think back to my education as having deprived me or built me in a way that I don't tend to think back and think, oh, my education was so good or my education was so bad. I think it was. That's how I think of it. It wasn't the important thing that shaped me. That's how I tend to think of it. Bensi says, oh, okay, you're talking about fluent speak. We're back to that language that's teaching Hasidic men English. He says, it's my company, my passion. We are an international company. We have 3,500 Hasidic clients. We're doing tremendous work. Awesome. Kol hakavod. I have not heard of it. I will look into it. Erica says, Catholic school teachers were nuns and very strict. Corporal punishment, the norm. Marian modesty was emphasized for girls. Girls were taught the boys physically cannot contain their sexual drive. I did not learn about boys. I did not learn. Maybe we learned it inadvertently through our lessons on modesty, that our bodies need to be covered. I did not hear it that way. We had an education that was very very intense on rules. And among the rules were how you dress. It was only one of many rules. Modesty was part of Shabbos and part of the rules of kosher and the rules of blessings. There were so many rules. I did not absorb modesty as something about my sexuality. It was just the rules. That's how a pious girl dresses. Like, this is your dress code, and this is how you have to dress. We also didn't have corporal punishment in the girls' school. The boys' school famously had corporal punishment. So I cannot, it's hard for me to fathom corporal punishment, nuns hitting children. Like, it's hard for me to imagine our teachers ever hitting anyone. It's unimaginable. But modesty was so emphasized all the time. If you didn't come to school with, like, if your hair was too long, you got kicked out, you got sent back home. Chrissy said, you're lucky that your education gave you more than one language. That is true. I think so. Lisa says, I went to Catholic primary school too, and it was honestly amazing. It was holistic, and I love how it kept me grounded in my faith. That's interesting, because very rarely do I hear that. Silence says, my heart went out to all of you in the Northeast for having to deal with all the wildfire smoke. It isn't fun stuff to deal with. It was so surreal. It was absolutely strange to step out and see what it looked like. Brittany says, hello from Texas. How did your school handle bullying? My daughter is in middle school, and it's been a very rough year, so I'm curious how your community handles that sort of thing. That's a good question. There's a lot of emphasis on Bei Udam noch weiter, which is the concept of you must work on your relationship between man and his friend. And therefore, a girl who didn't have friends or a girl who felt bullied, the parents might get involved, the school might get involved. And it was supposed to be, you weren't supposed to be bullying. There was definitely that value. I remember after I left, my son went to a more intermediate Jewish Orthodox school, and some of the younger kids were bullied by the older kids, and the school said, well, this is how they'll toughen up. We, in our girls' school, the teachers, the administrations would have intervened. But, children bullying each other, I don't think intervention is always effective. I think sometimes the school intervenes and the girls continue to be mean in their own way. I don't think it's, I don't think it was always effective, is what I'm saying. The girls who didn't have friends, even though we were told you must be their friends, you have to take them into your group. We all had groups of friends that met on Shabbos, and we would take these girls into our groups. They still were struggling ultimately as the case who was taking in the act of kindness that was, who wanted to need to have to an act of kindness. So I think there is no ideal solution for bullying, but I think we definitely prioritize trying in our own way. John asks, did your school teach you about other Hasidic sects and their philosophies? I did not understand anything about Hasidic sects. I did not know the difference between different versions of Orthodox Judaism. I just knew that there were more modern people and there was us. And I conflated Hasidism and Satmar as one. We had cousins that were in Satmar, and I assumed they were modern and not Hasidic. So I would say we definitely did not have any curriculum to help us make sense of that. And now I look through my binder, and we have stories on the Satmar Rebbe, and we have stories about other Rebbes, like the Belzer Rebbe, but those are stories about sages of back in the day. There was no sense that they were different sects. They were just other sages. And to be fair, I didn't absorb a lot. I sat in class and I daydreamed out the window. So I didn't absorb a lot. But as far as what I absorbed, I did not absorb anything about Hasidic philosophies. And of course, nothing about the Hasidic sect Lubavitch, which didn't exist in our world as a Hasidic group. I wouldn't have recognized Lubavitch Hasidim as Hasidic because they look too different. Andrea asks, what was the training of your teachers? After 11th grade, we all went out to work. The program was at 11th grade, most girls would do a trial lesson where they would teach a class for a day, and the principal would go into the class and watch you teach the lesson. And then the girls that were known to be confident and capable would get teaching jobs. So it was entirely based on the school knowing you and that one model lesson. That was all that it entailed. At the end of 11th grade, which was the end of our education, they picked girls to be to be the teachers, and the higher grade that you were assigned to. So let's say if you were assigned to kindergarten, that was not very good position, or it wasn't very respectable. The higher grade you got assigned to, the more it endorsed you and the more it added value to your resume as a marriage candidate. Because if you were a 7th grade English teacher, then that meant you were really somebody. So the training was absolutely just being in our school and the schools knowing you. Hi, Marcia from Savannah. And Tracy says, you ever watch the Watchtower building at the end of see the Watchtower building? No, you mean the Jehovah's Witness? I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry. Samuel says, did images of men in textbooks have pais and Hasidic clothing, or were they all repurposed secular textbooks? Were they still showing images of women in your time, or did that change happen earlier? I believe we had pictures of men and women in our textbooks. I believe that. I definitely remember George Washington and the big room with Thomas Jefferson and a library. We had a regular history book, and it had pictures of wars and whatever that came with a book. But I do remember we had a math textbook cover that had 2 people sitting outside of a school building, and one of them was blacked out, and it was because that was a girl. So because it was a boy and a girl sitting outside of the school building together, and the opposite sexes weren't allowed to mix, the censors had crossed out the girl. And I remember looking at that. But I think we had girls in our textbooks all the time, stories about girls. And the censorship ladies weren't necessarily systematic. So some things slipped through, other things were extremely harshly censored. There wasn't exactly a system. But I believe, I would say we had pictures of women in our textbooks and Gentile kids. We also had books at home, Berenstain Bears, that included pictures of characters like Berenstain Bears, women, of course, and men. Elizabeth said, did you learn about the history of various machlokas or fights and issues between Satmar and other courts, or the Mitnagdim? This is about the history of the Hasidic movement. We learned a little bit about the Vilna Gaon, when the origin of the Hasidic movement in its early days, when it was controversial. And the reason we covered it was because the Vilna Gaon was someone who objected to the Hasidic movement, but at the same time we venerated. So it was covered gently to sort of say both of these sides were venerable. That was the extent of what I remember. But we didn't cover any fights. No fights between brothers and infighting dramas. I don't remember us covering anything like that. When I was a child, there was a lot going on between the Satmar Grand Rabbi passed away in 1979, and his nephew took over, but his late wife, who was much younger than him, she sort of a faction broke off and got behind her, Rebbetzin Alta Feiga. And us children, I remember playing on the ground, on the street, on the lawns, and we would taunt the kids who were of the other side, but there was no formal acknowledgement of the fights in our school system. This was just something that was sort of, we had taken it from home. We'd heard about it from home, and we knew about it because the girls who had broken away were going to a separate small school. Tara, what types of extracurricular activities like sports do the schools offer? We did not have sports, but we played a lot of ball during recess. We had games like Lemonation and what's called Machanayim. So we had our own games. They were not organized. There was no such thing as a girl being academically advanced because she played sports. There was no concept whatsoever. Sports is a serious thing. It was play. It was fun. It was what you did on recess. And there were some girls who were really good, and then there were left-handed girls like me. But there was no formal sports, and there were also no art programs or music programs. Although I think there are a lot more parents now that are sending their children to such things after school. Not in my days. Leview, was there any ethnocentric messaging in your education? Something that would show that? I guess we'll have to get back to the question. Missing half of it. I hope this isn't a strange question, but did you feel that the way tznius was taught in your school was harmful? I went to Beis Yaakov and I feel the way we learned about tznius was almost abusive. I don't know. I probably the messaging around the body in general is something you need to hide affected me. I didn't take it to heart a lot. I didn't think about it a lot. My head was in my poetry notebook. My head was in whatever troubles we could make. So I have a hard time thinking of my modesty lessons as important because I didn't feel it was important. I was completely tuned out of a lot of the religious things. There were the girls. Every day we would pray, let's say 20 minutes, a half hour. It was long prayer sessions. And they were the girls who were shaking into their prayer books. They were crying. They were pleading. And then there was the girls like me, which there were plenty who were dreaming away. And there you could see their eyes were floating off into space. And as a result of that, I have a hard time attributing significance in hindsight to some of the things we learned because I didn't feel it was important at the time. Elizabeth said, were you able to continue on the college for other skills? I have partial master's degree, which I didn't finish because of the cost, not because I didn't have the skills. And also because I was a young single mother, I dropped out. CLH says, hello, just want to say hello from a fellow sophomore graduate. I'm not college educated, but I think I can hold my own in writing and speaking. I trust that you can. Marcia asks if I still have contact with my family, which is not on the subject of education. So I'm going to say yes and leave it at that. Cass says, good evening from the UK. That would show that your group was better than others. We definitely learned about the importance of the Jewish people keeping the tradition alive. You know, those things it was all very centrally about the importance of our way of life. Everyone else was sort of not in the picture kind of thing. Rena says, I really admire the work that you do, even though you left the community. You're so respectful of religious people. Thank you. It's interesting, and people have been recently so kind, hoping it stays, but it's made it easier. Samuel says, in what areas do you think the Hasidic world might modernize their education system for the sake of economic and government requirements? Are there any areas or topics that would be more open to change? Great question. I'm putting it out there, but I'm not going to answer it because I can pontificate from today to tomorrow. Leonardo says, if I may ask, do you wish you could have chosen to live your own way while your son would still have a Hasidic education? No, a big part of what led me on this journey was I had a very hard time imagining raising a child in the boys' education system, which my issue wasn't primarily about the education per se, but how hard it was on the attention span on children who had issues with what's called Sitzfleisch, with sitting for long hours. I see it as an exchange. You benefit a lot in a different world. There's a lot he learned. There's a lot that he benefited from. And also there are losses. It's definitely, I don't see one as the perfect or over the other. What's your personal opinion right now on religion and God? Just curious. Well, because it's not about education, I'm going to leave this here as well. Lifestyle says, for the Catholic school, I wonder for others if it depends on the year you attended. I was in school from 96 to 2008. No one would ever be allowed to hit you during the time. Did your son attend Jewish school? He had both. Hi from Edinburgh, Scotland. I noticed younger generation were more comfortable using English. Is Yiddish losing its dominance to English among younger generations? I don't think so. I don't see it in the streets. I have no idea. I don't see it. Might be people are more comfortable being bilingual, but it seems to me that Yiddish is alive and well. That's my impression. I don't hear young children, boys speaking in English. Maybe the girls. But that was always the case for the girls. Oh, thank you so much to Sydney, Australia. Did you ever revisit Curious Joel? My family's in Curious Joel. It's a village upstate New York. I go there to visit and for events, and it looks so different from my childhood. It is huge. It is enormous. I do visit, but not as often, of course, as I'm in Williamsburg. Did I come to the city often? My grandparents, I grew up in Curious Joel. My grandparents were in Williamsburg, both sets of my grandparents. And we went when I was young, once a week. We went after Shabbos. And I remember how nauseous, how sick we felt because we went in a big van. We had a lot of kids. And in the elevator, my grandparents lived in the projects. I remember how shocked I would be to see Gentiles because I grew up in such an insular village that it was a surprise, just not shocked. I remember the feeling of exposure when visiting my grandparents in the city. We had two cities when we were kids. There was the Goyish New York, the Gentile New York, and the Yiddish New York. And we would be in the minivan or the 15-passenger van, and we would feel sick and we would complain, and we would be told we're almost at the Yiddish New York, we're still in the Goyish New York. And it took me years into my adulthood for it to click for me that the Gentile New York, the Goyish New York, was what we called Manhattan. Every time we went through Manhattan, it's like, oh, we're at the Goyish New York, we're almost at the Yiddish New York. Let's see. Did teachers continue working once they were married? Yeah, a lot of teachers worked with one baby, maybe two. Most retired after that. Do teachers in the U.S. not undergo training and certification? In the U.K., you can't teach in school without it. Our schools didn't. I think maybe some programs now require it. If you could theoretically choose where to grow up, would you still want to grow up in the Hasidic environment? That's a good question. I feel enriched by having grown up there. I also feel like it made my life really hard. As a Jew who feels grateful for having such a strong connection to my Jewish heritage, I wouldn't have taken an easier way. I feel like my roots into my Jewish heritage have been planted by where I grew up. But I also went on a journey in life that I think, I don't know, I can see that life could be easier than the the way life turns out if you leave such a strongly rooting community. And I guess what I'm saying is I think my life was made harder, but also more beautiful by having had this background. Did you learn any of Raviol's texts in school? Raviol is Joel Teitelbaum, Satmar Rabbi. I was just looking again at my book, and we didn't learn. We learned 1 year. Mrs. Silberstein, our principal, taught us his book on Zionism, and I don't remember us looking at the book, but she would bring it in. So it was 1 year, maybe in 10th grade. And then in my binder for 6th grade, I see that we learned a Yiddish version of the story of Raviol's rescue from the Holocaust. And of course, we learned what I learned now by looking at my binder, that we learned a lot about his fight against Zionism. Were child safety told in school? What is child safety? I don't know what you mean, David. Hello from Wisconsin. Thank you. We students attended Catholic Mass every Friday in addition to religious lessons. Our field trips were to monasteries and to see Pope when he came to Des Moines in 1979. We also went on field trips, but we actually didn't go to monasteries. We actually went to Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty, and Liberty Science Center. So we went to like kosher museums. Unkosher museum would be, for instance, the Museum of Natural History, because it promotes a story of the world that is much longer than we acknowledged. So we would never go to the Museum of Natural History as a school trip. For years, our final school trip was the Twin Towers. And I was in 10th grade when that was taken from us. So I had always thought the big trip would be to go see the Twin Towers, and in the basement there were the gold blocks that my sisters had talked about. Hi there from Greece. Hello. Grew up in Londo, right? Hi from Germany. I found it really interesting that stuff like the laws of Shabbos were taught so thoroughly. Always thought that you learned most of it from growing up in a Hasidic family. I will tell you, it was taught really thoroughly. We, not only the laws of Shabbos, we learned a lot. We had to memorize the characters of the Bible. We didn't learn the Bible in the sense of here is this lesson. We did learn the Parsha, which was all about taking a piece of the story of the Bible, of the Torah, and then extrapolating moral lessons from it. But when we learned it as Geschichte, as history, it was pure memorization without any morality to it. And it was like a lot of things we memorized, a lot of things, laws, people, places from the Bible. There was a lot of things that were crammed into our minds. Elizabeth said you played Machanaim. That's funny because it's a classic Israeli game. Really? I didn't know. I thought it was a Hasidic game. My daughters would totally agree with a comment about tznius as abusive. I've heard that. I hear what you're saying. Did you experience anti-Semitism growing up, or did your close-knit community shelter you from facing anti-Semitism? I didn't experience anti-Semitism as a child in the way I would say I understand it now. I experienced being so acutely different that first and foremost went my Hasidic identity, and people responded to that, and I felt judged by that, and I felt people would, for instance, you go to you have an appointment at a doctor, and maybe something about, you have a sense that people are not maybe hard on you, maybe judgy. The receptionist is mean to you because you're different, because you're one of them. I had that sense, and it was primarily a sense that I was sometimes treated differently because people have prejudice against Hasidim. And this covered up any opportunity I had to understand that you could be treated differently as a Jew, because I saw either you're Hasidic or you're just a regular person. And once I left the community, I slowly started to understand anti-Semitism as something that it was something I would say I never grasped. I never was exposed to on a personal level until my Hasidic identity stopped going before me. So I would say I felt really sheltered from anti-Semitism. Of course, doesn't mean that we weren't targeted. You mentioned having sewing class. Did you have other subjects related to homemaking, like cooking, or were those other skills you learned at home? We had home economics. We learned this. I'm passing on to all of you. My gift to you. We learned that you wash a pot with steel wool on the inside and a sponge on the outside. This I remember. We had to answer it on a test. We learned how to iron, how to take care of a home. Yes. And trying to think if we had other homemaking skills. I do know that, like, my sister taught baking. They'll sometimes find someone who's very talented at something and just teach it to the students. We only had, I believe, home economics and sewing. Let's see. I just dropped in, so you may have answered this. Did you study about other religions? I did answer that. We did not study about other religions, not really. Do you have a favorite memory of your schooling or anything about it that makes you feel nostalgic? Um, it was we'd made a lot of trouble. We ran away from school, and we were up to a lot of shenanigans. And those things I I remember fondly. You know the movie Dead Poets Society? When I watched it, I felt like it was a movie about my schooling experience, even though we didn't have corporal punishment, and it wasn't as harsh. It was a schooling experience where the students kind of united and got up to a lot of mischief, and also worked really, really hard. And some parents were very strict. And the good parts that I remember is all the shenanigans we got up to. That's a good question. I think the community is getting more aggressive about treating these things, sometimes to the point of, yeah, I think the community is open to medicating ADHD. Sometimes parents don't want to, but I've heard of times the schools will push it because it's really hard to deal with children who have ADHD. Um, let's see. I have one child. Was child safety taught in school? It was not. Oh, hi, Aaron. I recognize you. Um, Wesley, we're going to have to block you. Oh, look who's here. Hold on. Look at that. Hi, Steve. How do the pupils and staff react? This is Steve. Steve edits my channel. He edited the video. How do the pupils and staff react to you taking your camera into school? Curious considering how camera shy they are around you now. Oh, that's true. People have cameras all the time, but they pose to each other. When I go to a Hasidic wedding, everyone will have cameras, usually apart from phones, which, like, there would be a flip phone and a camera, and we all had cameras. I cannot tell you how much time I spent accumulating the albums I have by going to develop my pictures. Remember, someone developed it in their home. You dropped it off, and they brought it back a couple days later, and we keep going to check if our pictures have been developed. Everyone was busy with pictures. I am most certainly not planning to do tours in Curious Joel. First of all, it's far. Second of all, it would be too hard. It's just not open to outsiders in the same way as the city is. Was included in your education something about the Talmudic practice of how should you behave to your husband? I don't remember learning about our husbands until we got married, until before our weddings. And if you want to know a little bit about our pre-marriage education, which was a special outside of the school system learning where we had private lessons and pre-marriage non-private lessons, I do have a post on my blog where I translated one of those lessons from Yiddish to English, if you're interested. Says ganz geht la masse. It was pretty okay after all, says Luxury Kosher Villas. I'm guessing Luxury Kosher Villas is actually the Luxury Kosher Villas channel. I believe I've seen ads. Do you study any mysticism like the Zohar? Hasidim believe that you shouldn't be studying mysticism until you're 40 and over. You shouldn't study Zohar. So no, we did not. Absolutely not. Anyway, I don't think girls would be studying it either way. Friends, while growing up, we used to talk amongst ourselves about their lessons at school. And mine, I went to Church of England school. We are still friends to this day. I'm now 69. That's awesome. One of the things I really love about giving tours is I meet people who sometimes are on a trip and have known each other like 40 years, and it's amazing to hold on to friendships for so many years. Child safety. Oh, child sexual abuse safety. I see what you mean. I don't think we learned anything. Do I think my son got a better education than me? In some ways, yes. he was prepared for the world that he's going to be stepping into. I have a lot of criticism of modern education system. I don't think it's a perfect world. I also feel like it was really sad that he spent 2 years without going to school. That was really horrible. I feel like that was 10 times worse than anything I had in my education learning remotely. Okay, we're going to see a few more questions. I wonder if your teachers weren't certified because the school was independent. I don't know. We definitely had some government programs. For instance, some of the things we had programs. We were a private school, but it's possible in the US, I don't know how it goes outside of the US, to get funding for schools for certain programs, even if it's a private school. So I'm pretty sure we got some private school program funding. Do I wish I had just Hebrew school instead of having both Yiddish and English? Heck no. Hebrew, you mean Hebrew school after regular school? No, English was the best part. English was all the fun. English was when we read censored stories. I got introduced to Sherlock Holmes. It was the best. I had a soul that drew me to English from the very beginning. Did your parents have to maintain any particular standards at home to enroll you in school? Absolutely. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Parents have to abide by certain expectations from the school in order for the school to accept children. When my son was in school and I was starting to sort of waffle on the rules, I was called down to the school and I was told very unequivocally that if we don't step in line, the schools will not accept us. And maybe at some point, I can show you the school guidebook, which very explicitly makes the rules clear that you're not allowed to have a TV, you're not allowed to have movies in the home, the dress code, and so on. The expectations of the school is if you want us to be able to deliver a private school education that introduces the children to our values, then we expect that the children come to school without bringing foreign values into the school. And they make that argument when they tell you you're not in compliance and therefore you're undermining the objective of the school and it's not fair to the other parents. That's essentially what I was told. And therefore the school rules expand beyond what is expected on the school premises into what is expected at the home. And this loops us around back to what I believe and what I said at the head of this, that I think education and schooling is a lot more than simply sitting in a classroom. So I don't disagree with the idea that education is the cumulative exposure of what you're learning. And if you have a school full of children that are exposed to certain messaging at home, no matter what messaging in school is, the messages children teach each other so much. I mean, I think children probably teach each other more than the teachers teach the children. When I pass by the Williamsburg community, they look happy and well taken care of. Do you have happy memories as a child? By the way, I grew up in Curious Joel. I have happy memories. I have not such happy memories. It was a childhood. I have a lot of good memories. How different is the Hasidic education today compared to how it was when I was in school? I don't know. Maybe I'll find out. I would love to look into it. Let's just take a few more questions and then wrap it up. I do not remember learning anything about the formation of Orthodoxy at all. I don't think our education acknowledged that there was a formation of Orthodoxy. I think okay, sorry. I didn't read the whole question. We Orthodoxy was to us from Mount Sinai, from the very beginning of time. But we did learn about the Chassam Sofer, Chudash Usin Min HaTorah, the new is forbidden according to the Torah, and the reformers. We learned a lot about that. We learned about the modernization and the fight against it. So it wasn't as the birth of Orthodoxy, but it was as the birth of reform that we had to protect ourselves against. I think so, Lisa. I would say so. I don't remember questioning. I taught secular subject in Beis Yaakov and found it interesting that children of such varying economic situations were in school together, which would not be the case in normal schools. That is interesting. Two things. I grew up very poor. My father had a failing sock factory when I was very young, and I definitely didn't have a higher financial hierarchy awareness. There was definitely a mixing of all economic strata, but also we didn't have any sorting of the students by who's more advanced and who's less advanced, which is something I found to be really sad, because you take the gifted students away from helping the less gifted students, and you build their identity so much on their intellectual talents instead of personality, instead of their what's called midas, their character. So I think it was interesting that we didn't get sorted by either by economic status or by the student's talent. Yes, it was definitely the case. We were all together. How do we ask a question? You just type it in the chat and I read it out. Yeah, I guess you figured it out. It's, what would you tell your ninth grade self? You could meet her, meaning you who are now went back in time. I would say it's gonna be interesting in the future. I would say it's gonna be an adventure, just like in the stories. All right. So let me take just two more questions. I think people don't go to med school because it is too difficult to manage med school when you get married young and you have children and you have to support a family. It's really hard to juggle that with med school. There have been people, now that you can go to college remotely, there have been more people that have been pursuing these very advanced training professions like med school. Oh, that is a great question. When is the video about the different dynasty coming, please? The real reason I haven't done a video on different Hasidic dynasties is because I can't really speak very well about Hasidic dynasties. I know a lot about Satmar, and I know about Satmar adjacent sects. So there are a lot of people in Williamsburg that are not Satmar, and they look very much to me like Satmar. I can't tell people apart by sect. But outside of that, I don't feel comfortable talking about Babuv. I definitely don't feel comfortable talking about Chabad. I feel like everything I say would be wrong. So I'm really shy about doing it. I'm just gun shy because it seems like the topic is larger than me. Thank you. Oh, hi. It's so good to see Shalva McDonald. I'm starting to recognize some of you who leave comments that I'm starting to recognize some of your names. We're a lot about how we are repressing Hasidim to the rest of the world as well. Rules about our homes were a lot about how we are representing Hasidim. Yeah. Are you Chabad, Dana? We didn't have a very strong sense about, we didn't have a very strong concern about the world beyond us. Well, I know a lot of Balachuvas who are doctors, though. Well, thank you all so much for coming. You've asked such great questions. This is the first time I'm using this platform, and I used it because I wanted to be able to show the comment. I'm still in the habit of reading the comment to the audience, but it's I think this is a much better platform. Thank you, all of you. Toda, yasher koach, whatever, gracias. All of you asked such great questions. And of course, I'm wishing all of you a good Shabbos. I am hoping to do more live streams in the future if this is something that you enjoy. I personally enjoy doing it, and I enjoy getting to see some of you who I see in my comments. Even though I sometimes go a little bit of time without reading my comments, I end up going through them, and I really enjoy reading comments. I will say there are two kinds of comments I very much enjoy reading. I enjoy when people tell me about their own experiences in their education, whatever it is in their culture. That is something I enjoy immensely. And I also very much enjoy when people correct me or add nuance or creases into something I cover, people who know things that I don't know. I never take, if you correct me or you improve on what my material, I do not take it in any which way as criticism. I really enjoy reading it. I feel like the fact that you take the time to educate me is really a gift, and it makes me really happy. All of this project is an enormous amount of time and effort, and these kinds of things, seeing your comments and your enormous generosity has been really, really meaningful, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone. I'm gonna go finish up for Shabbos and call my mother, and I'll see you in the comments. Make sure, if you're not subscribed, to subscribe to my channel.